The family sent the widowed woman for revenge, but she was the treasure he had dreamed of. Thunder funneled down from the hills as Elias Hawthorne waited at the north fence, watching a ribbon of dust crawl toward his gate. In his pocket, the Vale letter crackled. Take the widow and the creek acres will be conveyed. No blessing, no reason, only a threat shaped as charity. The wax seal, black as a bruise, stamped a symbol he recognized from a grave he had never spoken about. The wagon surfaced, mules lathered, wheels shivering through ruts. A rider kept pace, coat slick with grit, eyes unreadable. Between the flaps sat a woman in a gray dress, posture unyielding, gloved fingers wrapped around an iron key. Abigail Vale. She did not blink at the storm, or the man at the fence. She studied the house, the corrals, the windmill, as if ticking off a list only she could see. Elias touched the fence wire, it hummed with charge. He told himself this was land, nothing more. Yet the letter's closing line gnawed. Accept her, and the old debt ends. He had no old debt, or none he dared name. Lightning stitched the sky. Thunder rolled. The wagon halted. The rider didn't dismount. Terms kept, he said. She stays. Abigail rose, stepped down without help, and set the key in Elias's palm. You'll need this tonight, she said, voice steady. It fits the lock behind the ledger in your father's desk. Elias's jaw hardened. My father's desk burned years ago. Her gaze didn't waver. Not the one you think. The one hidden under the false floor in the south room. The one that holds the deed they stole and the name you've been avoiding since you were 12. Wind tore across the yard out here. Who told you that? She lifted her chin. Your mother. What happened next will shock you.
Elias swung the gate and let the wagon clatter into the yard, iron rims beating a dry measure against stones. Wind rubbed grit across the porch, and the cottonwoods along the creek leaned as the sky pressed lower. The envoy dismounted without greeting, coat dark with sweat, jaw set like a vise. He produced a folded paper sealed in black wax, held it high so the emblem showed before the words could be read. Abigail stepped down on her own, boots square, one gloved hand steadying her skirts. Her gaze moved once over the house, the corrals, the windmill, and the creek bend, not with curiosity but with the careful counting calm of someone whose life had taught her to catalog exits and shelter in the same breath. Terms kept. The envoy said, she stayed 20 acres along the creek when you sign the receipt. He placed the paper on the rail as if wood itself could witness. The tone chose command over courtesy. Elias did not touch it yet. He studied the man, the driver, the mule team, then the woman delivered like cargo with a name. Abigail Vale watched him without plea. Thunder stitched far off. The air carried that flat metallic taste that precedes the first hard rain. Between them the possibilities felt as heavy as a trunk lashed behind the seat. Elias lifted one handle of that trunk. Abigail took the other. The weight argued with its size, some inner metal sliding once against a corner. Together they carried it through the main room, past the hearth and the table that could sit 6, though it rarely sat 2, and down the short hall where 3 doors faced south. He opened the smallest, a narrow bed, a cracked basin, a chair, one window over cottonwoods bent toward water. Use this, he said, bolts inside, pumps out back. Shutters complain if the wind turns. She nodded and set her satchel on the chair, bonnet pins slipping into the pocket with a soft click. Back on the porch, the envoy pushed the paper nearer. Receipt, he repeated. No visits. No return without notice. Deed on fulfillment. Elias read each line the way a man reads a sky, not for poetry but for threat. The language was plain, the intent smelled like bait. He signed because hay stacked on his own creek bank would winter the herd easier than hauling from town. And because saying no to a proud family can cost more than a man can count in one season. The envoy folded the paper, tipped his hat without warmth, and mounted. Keep her, he said, and turned out through the gate. Wheels and hooves dwindled to a smear of dust that the wind pulled apart. Silence settled, but did not soothe. Elias stood until the yard felt like it belonged to him again, then strode to the corral and stripped harness from the sweating mules. Work steadied blood. He checked the hinge that sighed, counted fence posts without meaning to, and noted how the storm line crawled with the slow authority of a debt coming due. Arithmetic tried to reassure him, A room meals 20 acres. But trades set by men who liked their names pressed into wax rarely stopped at the first price. The letter in his pocket creased against his ribs, and felt colder than paper should. When he stepped back inside, Abigail had unpacked a comb, a needle roll, a tin of thread, a book with a split spine, and a small folded shawl. The trunk remained latched. Her boots sat neatly by the chair, toes aligned. She had washed and left the water standing in the basin, proof of use without waste. Supper's beans and salt pork, he said. Coffee's bitter. I have drunk worse, she answered, voice even. They ate opposite ends of the long table, elbows clear, motions tight. Forks and the ticking clock made more sound than their talk. His mind kept trying to travel the same tight circle, 20 acres for a stranger, a family known for grudges, offering charity is pinned to condition. He heard the envoy's keep as if it had been a nail pushed into the word stay. After plates were stacked, he brought out a hand-drawn map, edges warped from years of pockets. The creek turns here, he said, tracing the bend. Cottonwoods mark the boundary. Calves drift toward this cut near dusk. The well handle sticks if the weather swings cold. The stove damper wants tapping, not a yank. She listened with that counting stillness, then asked one question: what is behind the south room wall where the boards run short? The hairs at his nape rose. Studs, dust, mice, he said. Storm brought the wall out of square years ago. She accepted the answer without comment, which did not feel like agreement. Rain began plain and steady, no theater, just weight on wood. He lit lamps, set shutters and left top slats open for air. He placed a small key on the washstand, though he had already left it once, a reflex like checking a gate twice when cattle test fences. If wind rises, wedge a chair, he said. Storms like to learn what holds. So do families, she replied. The sentence fit the room the way a nail fits a board, quiet, necessary, sharp when stepped on. He did not ask which lesson she meant, because asking would be the same as inviting the answer to live here. He asked how long she had been widowed, and regretted the bluntness as soon as it cleared his teeth. Long enough to be sent, she said. Eyes on the window where rain stitched a gray veil. The envoy was your brother. A single nod. The motion did not honor anyone. He waited for elaboration and received none. Absence told its own story, a house where speech punished the speaker, a table where truth sat outside like a stray dog. Nobody named. He dried the last plate and set the cloth down so he would stop looking for a better question. He read the paper again by lamplight. No visit. No return. Receipt. Words that chose control over courtesy. He turned the sheet face down and felt his pulse hum against the wax through the paper. Agreements that look simple in town grow teeth at home. He stirred the fire and watched sparks rise like insects chasing a moon they would never catch. A board whispered along the hall. Abigail stood in the doorway, not crossing the threshold, not retreating. The stance respected the room and claimed survival in the same breath. I will work for what I eat, she said. I will mend, plant, clean and turn the pump if it sticks. I will keep to my room when asked. I will not carry messages for the people who sent me, and I will not help them wash their hands. Her tone did not beg or bristle. It reported. Elias measured her statement the way he measured cattle, by frame, set, and the steadiness of the gaze. Then my rules, he said. Doors close in storms. Work starts before light. Nobody raises a hand here except to lift iron or pull wheat. If danger rides with you, it does not buy my silence. She breathed once, slow, as if a held muscle had finally been allowed to lower its guard. Then we understand each other, she said. He walked her to the small room again. The bolt sticks, he told her. Lift while you slide. She tried it, found the catch and nodded. He started to turn away, then forced himself to add what ought to have been obvious. You were delivered like cargo. You will be treated as a person. The words felt stiff, but they were the best he had quick to hand. I know the difference, she said. So do the people who sent me. That is why they prefer receipts. He sat with the fire after she closed her door, stacking morning chores in his head the way a man stacks boards. Salt block, trough gate, roof nails, hinge. The house had altered under a new heartbeat. The letter had opened a space he did not want, and a woman he did not know had stepped into it carrying silence that weighed like iron. He told himself again the bargain was hay and water, not stories. Yet his thoughts kept returning to the seam in the south wall and to the way her glance had landed there without touching it. He checked doors, banked the fire, and doused lamps until coals glowed like stubborn rain hissed in a steady lull. Sleep should have come. It did not. He poured coffee he did not want, and swallowed it black. Why a widow for a boundary? Why silence for a seal? Why him? When the territory crawled with easier men, he found himself back at her door without deciding to go there. He did not knock. He listened until his own breath sounded loud and turned away because he had no right to ask what he wanted to know. At the hallway's end he stopped at the south room and pressed his fingers against the painted seam where boards run a shade short. The wood felt cooler than the wall beside it. He remembered a boy's hand reaching there and a father's voice telling him to leave what he had not put there. Some rooms keep their own counsel. The rain deepened, then eased. He returned to the hearth, sat and let weight settle into his bones. He had taken Abigail Vale into his house because the numbers said yes. The work would be work, and the storm would be a storm. Yet he heard again the envoy's keep in the quiet way she had said sent, and felt how both words shifted the floor under his feet. He tried to end the night with one thought fit to carry into dawn. The Vale's motives were not clean, but the work would be. If she planted, he would water. If she mended, he would haul. If danger tested the door, he would stand in it. Duty should be enough. Then traitorously, something less practical stirred when he remembered the breath she had let out after they agreed to the rules. Suspicion held its ground, and so did a small unwanted hope. He did not invite either, but he could not evict them yet. Dawn seeped through the shutters as a gray breath, and the house answered with slow creaks after the storm. Elias rose to the bitter scent of coffee and the softer smell of flour. In the kitchen, Abigail stood with sleeves rolled, hands steady in a bowl. She folded the dough and let it rest beneath a striped cloth. Movements exact, no waste. The stove ticked, the kettle hissed. "You don't have to do that," he said, meaning the bread, meaning the way the room had already changed. "I know," she replied. "It still needs doing." She tied a scarf and nodded toward the back door. "Garden. Behind the shed," he said. "I let it go. Then we will ask it to forgive us." He fetched a worn hoe, a spade, and twine. Puddles mirrored a thin strip of sky. Cottonwoods shook beads of water from their leaves. The soil welcomed a boot, and didn't want to give it back. Abigail marked a square rather than rows. Cleaned edges, lifted stones and laid them in the barrow. He followed with the load, trying not to watch the efficient way she set her knees and kept her back safe. She pressed her palm to the dirt. "This ground remembers hands," she said. "Whose?" "Someone who talked while she worked." "My mother," he answered. And the word felt risky. She named onions like cousins. Then the place learned to listen. Abigail said, drawing the hoe as if writing a neat line. He brought out seed packets he had stored and forgotten. Beans, squash. A few tomatoes and late lettuce. Her mouth softened at the sight. Not a smile exactly. More recognition. She set stakes by eye and laid twine true. "Mend your east corner," she said. "I'll turn beds. If clouds reform, we cover with sacks." He took the fence and left her in the field. Wind combed the grass flat. Every so often he looked back and saw her moving through that square of earth without fuss, pausing to drink, to test the sky, to coax roots free. The work told a story she hadn't spoken, a life arranged in small exact pieces, while other hands tried to scatter them. By midday the cloud shelf thinned and light silvered the puddles. Inside he set the loaves to bake, cut onions, browned pork ends and slid beans into the pot. When she came to wash, her forearms were circled with fine lines of soil, knuckles like river stones. He passed a towel, she dried in practical strokes, then checked the oven, listened and nudged the damper the smallest degree. The house seemed to settle around that choice, as if machinery liked being noticed. They carried bowls and bread to the table. She placed a plate at his seat before he could reach for one, set the cup turned for coffee and squared the fork. The gesture landed like a nod. They ate without speaking, and the quiet felt full rather than vacant. He tasted smoke in the meat and a green edge in the leaves she had salvaged near the fence. The crust gave a crackle and then softened. The room held the clean smell of rain on wood. Wind lifted and fell, and the loose latch tapped twice. learning a calmer rhythm. He watched the small decisions she made. A cup moved a thumb's width to stop a wobble. The knife was placed where a tired hand would expect it. Her own hand was drawn back from the salt when his reached for it. Not timid, simply granting choice. When he met her look, he found attention without plea. Something rigid inside him eased, the plank he had nailed across certain doors shifting under its own weight. Afterward she wrapped half a loaf in a clean cloth and set it high. "For trouble," she said. "What kind?" "The usual," she answered, "and let the mystery sit." They shaded the new seed with burlap and anchored corners with stones. The garden, a tangle at dawn, now held lines. Watching her, he saw that order could be gentle. He had chosen usefulness so ruthlessly that tenderness had seemed a waste. She showed it could be a way of keeping faith with a place. At the pump she worked the sticking handle with the lift he had shown, and did it again until her muscles remembered. "Hinges learn," she said. "So do people." He rinsed tools and hung them where they would not warp. She glanced toward the south room, then back to the beds. The look measured patience against need and chose patience. Questions rose in him and passed. Secrets should arrive when a chair has been Steam fogged the small window when they returned inside. He poured coffee and slid a cup toward her. She rested her fingers near his for one breath. The nearness did what words could not. The house hummed. A board settling. A far hinge. Easing. Wind worrying a shutter. And then minding its place. Have you ever met someone who changed everything without a word? Share your story below. The thought moved through him like a low note, steady, persuasive, and gone. Afternoon ran narrow and bright. She stitched a torn feed sack with a strong backstitch. He oiled the latch that had sung since May. They passed each other without colliding, and the rooms adjusted to two patterns. When a shutter clapped once, she rose, set it, and returned with the calm of someone who had put worse to right. He saw how the envoy's bark and the veil wax had drawn a picture of her that did not fit the woman setting twine in a neat loop. Evening unfolded like a clean bandage. He walked the fence and came back to find a plate kept warm near the stove. No note, no flourish, only the plain grace of thoughtfulness. Outside, coyotes tested the dark and gave up. Cottonwoods whispered the kind of talk trees keep for themselves. He ate and listened to the house breathe as if its ribs had widened. He set down his cup and looked toward the narrow door where a lamp burned low. The day had not cleared his doubts about the veil's motives, or the seam in the south wall, or the key she had placed in his palm. It had done something different. It had shown him a steadiness that did not argue and did not bow, a strength made from mending what others had torn. His assumptions loosened like old wire, and he let them because they had fenced him in as surely as they had kept trouble out. Sleep would come later. For now he memorized the sound the house made with two people in it. The faint scrape of a chair, the fire easing against its coals, boards settling as if relieved to carry more than one person's weight. He did not thank her aloud. He did not reach for her hand. He stood in the doorway between the kitchen and the hall and allowed a new thought to live. Strength can be quiet and still change a life. He noticed her resilience and, despite himself, questioned what he had been so sure of yesterday. By late afternoon the sky went the color of bruised slate. Wind slid down the draws with a hiss that meant trouble had chosen a path. Elias saw the burlap lift at the corner of the beds Abigail had shaped that morning. He moved to tack it, felt the first cold drops and smelled the mineral warning storms carry when they intend to break neat work. Abigail was there first, skirts tied up, hair damp, palms pressing edges flat while gusts tugged the cloth. Water pooled in the new furrows, seeds skimmed the top and slapped the fence. The square that had looked orderly now looked wounded. She set stones as anchors, then knelt with her hands in the mud and watched the soil turn violent. She did not cry or curse. She watched the ruin as if reading a paragraph she already knew. That steadiness unsettled him more than grief would have. He shrugged off his coat and draped it around her shoulders. She did not reach to hold it closed. "You were right to try," he said. "It was never going to hold," she answered, voice soft but sure. "Not against a house that likes everything washed clean." He thought she meant the sky, then understood. "Whose house?" "Theirs," she said, meaning the family that had signed her fate with wax. "They start storms and swear they only noticed clouds." He counted heartbeats, then steered her toward the porch. Mud sucked at their boots. The pump handle clanged once behind them. Inside, the rooms felt smaller the way houses do when the weather wants to come in. She wiped water from her face, then held her palms to the heat until her fingers steadied. He drew the blanket forward and his knuckles brushed her sleeve. The contact stayed an instant longer than it should have. Neither spoke. "I planted late on purpose," she said, eyes on the fire. "I hoped the season might run long and surprise someone who enjoys watching endings." "Your brothers," he said. "The house teaches lessons," she answered. "Some learn them, some make others live them. When my husband died, they rewrote the version they could stand." She lifted her chin a fraction. "You asked how long. Long enough for people to polish a story." Rain battered the shutters, eased then returned. Floorboards gave a tired pop near the hall. Abigail's scarf had slipped at her collarbone. She did not fix it. "He was not kind," she said. "He was applauded in town and quiet at home. He counted hours and coins and called that love. I was told to be grateful a bitter man saw me at all." She spoke like someone balancing a ledger at last. "What ended it?" Elias asked. "Snow," she said, "and a horse that should not have carried double, and a man who thought ice would hold because pride told him it must. He wanted a shortcut across the creek. The creek exacted its rate. I pulled until the rope cut my hands. It does not matter whether you believe it." The people who did not need to believe decided before the thaw. He poured coffee, set it within reach and sat close to the fire. "Your family said you wanted him gone," he said. "They needed a narrative that absolved the table," she said. "Stories taste better when they erase the cook." A small smile ghosted her mouth. "A widow embarrasses a house that loves neat lines." The blanket slipped again. He set it more carefully about her shoulders, letting his hands linger a heartbeat. She did not flinch. "My mother would have hit the table and told a different version," he said. "Your mother hid versions where men did not look." She answered, eyes flicking toward that south door. "Women leave maps when they cannot leave keys." Wet wool and ash scented the air. He listened to the drip in the chimney and the wind tiring of hinges. The house, loud under gusts, seemed to lean closer now. "I should go cover what can be saved," she said, standing. "There is no rush," he said. "The soil will take what it needs and give back what it can. We will plant again." For the first time since arriving, she let the weight settle. Her hands opened, palms outward, cotton thread marks crossing like small roads. "Did he ever apologize?" he asked. "Men who build themselves from bruises think they owe none," she said. "He wore grief like armor and called it duty. I learned to count exits in every room." "Here," he said, surprising himself, "hands only lift and mend. If a different rule comes through that door it meets me first." She studied him, and in that study, he felt something recalibrate, like a scale finding level after seasons of wrong weights. A gust rattled the latch, then died. Outside the creek ran thicker, voice changed by a new burden. Inside the fire glowed steadily. New rain whispered at the window and wandered away. "Have you ever lost something you fought for? Tell us how you carried on." The thought moved through him like a quiet bell and left stillness behind that did not feel empty. "Thank you," she said. And the word held more than gratitude. It held a truce. He followed her to the porch. Evening shook water off its back and gave the land one clean hour. The garden still held puddles, but narrower now. She knelt and, with 2 fingers, righted a bean. The small rescue pricked him more than any strength he saw was sometimes this. Noticing one green thing and choosing not to let it drown. He laid spare canvas where runoff sliced the bed. She steadied herself with a palm on his forearm while setting a stone, and that brief touch woke an old protectiveness. It did not feel like possession. It felt like an oath. Frogs tested their notes. Beyond the cottonwoods a coyote gave one thin cry and quit. She rinsed mud from her hands and left the last water for the yard cat that prowled at dusk. Inside he lit a single lamp. The soft circle of light made a small country between them. She looked at his shoulder, then at his face, as if testing whether he would keep a promise. He could not change her past. He could stand in the doorway when knocking turned hard. He could carry seed, hammer stakes, and listen. When she closed her door he stood at the hall's end and laid his palm on the seam in the south wall. He turned back to the hearth and knew the woman delivered like cargo carried deep private pain, and wore resilience like plain cloth. Under that cloth lay a hurt he could not yet name. It stirred something stern in him. He felt it like weather that had crossed mountains to reach his gate. He banked the fire and listened to the roof give a tired sigh, the house settling like a chest after a long breath. In that hush, he felt a clear pull toward guardianship. Not pride, not claim, only the steady promise to stand where weather breaks and to keep standing when it tries again. All night, if need. Morning broke with a thin, uneasy brightness. Elias checked the east fence and turned back toward the house, thinking of burlap and seedlings. Abigail was already at the square of turned earth. Sleeves rolled, coaxing furrows back after rain had slapped them crooked. He was halfway to the pump when hoofbeats built from the ridge and a wagon rattled behind them. 2 riders came first, then the team. Joel Vale sat straight, coat neat, smile made for rooms with polished floors. Caleb Vale rode to his right, heavier hat low. Abigail straightened but did not step back. Elias walked to the center of the yard. Gate swings both ways, he said. Joel's smile widened. Business does too. Caleb tugged a folded paper from his coat and read in an official voice. Sworn statement regarding the death of Thomas Hargreave. Quarrels, motive, debt, petition for custody of the widow while facts are examined. Abigail's tone did not sharpen. You petition because you cannot prove. Joel's eyes slid past Elias toward the door. Search now, talk later, he told the driver. The man climbed the steps. Elias set a boot on the first plank. Nobody walks in, he said. The driver paused and looked back for a nod that did not come. Rain scent lifted, metallic and clean. Joel tapped a metal box wedged beside the ledgers. Records live here. Promises you wrote to yourselves, Abigail said. Debts you sold after the funeral lunch. Cottonwoods hissed like leaves disapproving. Elias measured distances, the way he always did when men brought theater to a doorstep. Wait at the bend, he said. Bring your badge and your audience. I will be here. Joel turned his horse. Caleb clicked the team forward. Dust rose, hung, fell. The wagon rattled out through the gate. Silence returned with a watchful posture. Abigail folded the rag in her hand, set it on the rail, picked it up and folded it again. They will stage a spectacle, she said. They prefer neighbors to truth. Then we will supply a different stage. Elias replied. He checked the latch on the small gate, the hinge on the porch door, and the seam in the south wall because he walked there whenever men mentioned boxes. Cloud rebuilt, stacking gray on gray. Thunder rolled. The sheriff crested the rise with 2 deputies. The Vale brothers followed with the wagon and a couple of townsmen who liked afternoons with drama. Rain began as points on dust and then drew lines. The sheriff reined near the pump, touched his brim and took stock with the caution of a man burned by family quarrel. Got a petition, he said. Needs statements. Abigail stood beside Elias, not behind. Use my name as it is now, she told him. Abigail Vale. He nodded and looked to the brothers. Joel delivered the rehearsed lines again, and tried to hand accusations across the gap as if they were contagious. Elias did not take them. Ask your questions, Elias said from there. No one enters unless the roof falls in. The sheriff addressed Abigail. There was a warning, she said. Ice breaks. Men who confuse stubbornness with honor pretend it does not. She held out her palms. Rope scars ran like pale rivers. I pulled. He went under. Joel barked a laugh. A neighbor heard threat. A neighbor hears his own appetites. Elias said. Caleb pointed at the door. Search. No, Elias answered, and the word hit the yard like a post driver. Rain thickened. The badge dulled but looked heavier. The sheriff studied faces. Elias steady at the threshold. Abigail steady at his shoulder. The brothers thrumming with outrage shaped for an audience. Here is what happens, he said. 3 days. We hold a hearing in town. Bring ledgers and witnesses. Until then, Miss Vale stays where she is, and nobody walks through that door. Joel hissed a name that was not the sheriff's. Caleb's mouth tightened. The deputies eyed the rain and wanted a roof. The townsmen shifted. Caleb tried again. She will run. Abigail's answer was simple. I am tired of traveling for lies. The sheriff tipped his hat. Lock your gates, he said to Elias. Expect trouble in town. Not here. He turned his horse with the care of a man carrying fire through dry brush. Joel leaned as they began to move. We will be back with names you cannot dismiss. You will be back with paper that curls when it rains. Elias replied. The procession rattled away. Wheels clicked on stones and were swallowed by distance. When the yard reclaimed its quiet, cottonwoods exhaled like lungs done hold. Abigail inhaled, held and let go. She rubbed the rag across her knuckles as if wiping off the residue of a house that loved performance more than truth. Anger eased in Elias into something cooler and more useful. They will be worse after the first no, he said. They always are, she answered. When story fails, volume increases. He offered a half loaf from the shelf. She cut 2 slices, set one for him without ceremony, and the ordinary act steadied the room better than any speech. Have you stood up for someone against the odds? Share your moment of courage. They returned to work because work quiets a heart after noise. Burlap needed rocks. A washout needed straw. A post needed straightening. He lifted when she braced. She braced when he lifted. Hands met on rough fabric. Pressed, separated and met again. Trust, he realized, does not always announce itself with trumpets. Sometimes it leans its shoulder beside yours and does not ask for applause. By evening the storm wandered east. Inside he set the kettle and drew 2 cups down. The air held wood smoke, wet wool and something steadier he could not name yet. Abigail warmed her hands near the stove without asking permission. She did not need. He set a cup within reach. She turned it a finger's width to stop a wobble. They will bring stacks of paper, she said. Pages that look proper until someone reads the small turns. Then we will read, he said. We will ask about the little words and the margins where men hide knives. She considered that and a small ease showed in her shoulders. Not relief. Ready. He banked the fire then left it high enough that shadows mattered less. She lifted the wrapped half loaf and set it on the table. For later, she said. For when they crave proof and we need strength, he answered. The storm moved east. Wind soft. The ranch felt like a body after a long run. Tired. Alert. Ready. He had defended a woman because it was right. He realized, standing there with a cup cooling his palm, that he also wanted. He respected the line of her back, the even weight of her step, the way she saved small living things without announcing philosophy. They would go to town in 3 days, and stand in a room that preferred drama. Between now and then, they would mend, eat, sleep, and set bolts against a family that loved show more than truth. He understood more about her pain than he had yesterday. He did not understand enough. He could learn. The thought steadied him. Outside, the cottonwoods shook once like men settling coats on shoulders. The garden lay dark and promising under its cloth. The creek ran fuller and colder. He and Abigail would stand in the yard when riders appeared and stand again when riders left. That union did not announce itself with banners. It signed itself in useful ink. Shared labor, plain food, 2 cups within reach of heat and a promise to resist the storm together when it chose to ride back. Night pressed against the windows like cooled iron, and the lamp on the table cut a faithful circle in the room. Rain had finally marched east, leaving damp in the seams and a hush that made each breath sound deliberate. Abigail sat where the light touched her hands, palms upward, rope scars pale as chalk lines. Elias stood by the stove and kept quiet until his fists, tight without permission, uncurled. The house creaked once along the south wall, a tired animal settling into itself. He poured coffee, set a cup near her, and took the chair at an angle so he could see her face without crowding it. I married at 19, she said. He wore goodness on Sundays and wrath on weekdays. He knew which kindness to perform in public and which hunger to feed where no one would look. A house can split around that kind of man, neat as firewood. Mine did. I learned to cook quietly, laugh quietly, and keep my bruises where talk could not reach. The lamp wick hissed. A moth tapped the chimney and went still. Water trickled from the eaves into the pan by the door. Elias clasped his hands to keep them from answering for her. Empty promises felt like laying a plank across a flood while the river still rose. He hid debts, she went on. Cards, land schemes, borrowed names with better credit than his own. When winter hardened the road, he wanted the shortcut across the creek. The ice took offense. I told him to wait. He shoved the rope at me, proud as if he were unveiling an invention. Pull, he said. He stepped where water whispered beneath white crust. Pride pretends it weighs nothing. Ice knows better. He went through. I went to my knees and hauled until my palms bled. His hat surfaced downstream like somebody else's luck. By the time neighbors arrived with poles, the creek had decided and would not be argued with. She drew a measured breath, and set it down between them like a tool she might use again. They needed a villain to hush an inconvenient truth. A widow is convenient. My brothers began their revision at the funeral supper. They fed the story until it could stand upright. They said I planned the crossing. They discovered a note I did not write. They served sorrow to visitors and anger to me. Then they inventoried what he left. Ledgers, parcels and a team. They did not want the debts. Only the pieces that could polish their name. Elias felt heat behind his ribs. He opened his hands, one finger at a time until the urge to strike something could breathe and leave. Did you tell the sheriff? I told him everything, she said. He believed what would cost him least. A family with money and committees speaks a language officials understand. I speak one they prefer not to learn. Still, truth is stubborn. It waits. It blooms in cracks. Before he died, my husband hid papers that made my brothers nervous. They searched my rooms with the politeness men reserve for thieves. They found nothing, because he did not trust them either. He trusted locks and places nobody dusts. Her eyes moved not to the south wall but near it as if memory leaned there. Elias followed that glance and felt the old chill of a warning he had learned as a boy. Some boards were meant to be touched only when the house itself invited it. The quiet in the room changed shape, attentive without tipping into threat. When the envoy left me at your gate, he said, keep as if I were weather, she continued. They did not send me for charity, they sent me because they think your land and your silence can be entered in their ledger if I play my part. They assume grief will make me weak, and that a man alone will welcome the echo they prefer. What papers? He asked. Carefully. Proof his partners were not partners. Only hands moving ink. She said. A deed that mentions a creek bend none of them own, and a name that appears twice, once with honor, once with debt. If the wrong copy survives, my brothers eat well. If the right one stands, men who sit for portraits get headaches. He felt his jaw set. They mean to force you back before those pages breathe. They mean to stage a rescue, she said. And the word tasted bitter. They will arrive with proper faces, carry me through a door in town and let the room decide what woman I have been. If they win, they inherit my silence with his lies. The lamp hummed. Night leaned against the panes like a listener. Elias drew his chair closer and set his forearms on his knees. What did you do when the ice took him? I counted heartbeats to be sure the rope had stopped moving, she said. Then I walked home because there was nothing else to carry. My mother met me at the steps. She washed my hands and told me to let the house speak for a while. Houses keep better stories than people when men insist on noise. She died months later. I think she left me her manner of listening. He nodded. He had felt that since her arrival. A listening that mended seams without showing stitches. And now I use it to outlast them, she said. They want a stage. I will give them a table instead. Tables remember who eats and who pays. Silence stretched, not empty, not cruel. He saw the shape of her hurt and the iron edge of her resolve. Anger alone could not cover what her people had done. Anger burns hot and ends. Betrayal corrodes evenly and keeps its polish. He looked at his hands and pictured where they would fall if a Vale brother crossed his threshold. The picture steadied nothing, but it made one thing clear. Abigail, he said. And her name felt like an oath. They will not carry you anywhere. Not from this room. Her breath left in a sound that might have been relief. Learning a new instrument. That vow will ask you for a price, she warned. I have paid for smaller things with more, he said. This house owes a debt to people who hid maps where boys would someday need them. I suspect my mother's hand is in what you found. If there is a lock, I will open it. If there is a copy, I will read it aloud. She reached across the table and set 2 fingers lightly on his wrist, as if checking a pulse. He did not move. The touch lived long enough to decide what it wanted. Thank you, she said. He turned his palm upward and did not close. Tomorrow, he answered, voice low. We look where my father told me not to. We will bring light where they counted shadows. A coal settled in the stove with a soft clink. In the next room, a board eased into place like a tired shoulder finding a friendly hand. Wind worried the eaves and then changed its mind. He covered her fingers with his own for a breath. No claim, only promise. I will protect you, he said. On the road, in the room, at this table, I'll stand between you and any script they rehearse. Her gaze met his without flinch. Then we walk into that room together. We do, he said. Their hands parted, but the vow remained in the grain of the table and the pitch of the rafters, settled like heat after flame, present, enduring, red. Dawn came in hard and gray, making the cottonwoods look like sentries waiting on judgment. Wind crawled out of the draws, tugging at shutters and pushing a low moan through the pump handle. Elias checked the garden cloth, tightened each stone, and wedged the porch door. By mid-morning the sky turned to iron. Weather walked toward the ranch, like a posse with a warrant. Abigail moved quietly, tying her hair, setting 2 cups on the table, and folding the shawl she kept near the chair. Neither spoke about the town, nor the brothers. They let the boards and hinges talk while they waited. Hoofbeats rolled first, then wheels. A column crested the rise, the sheriff, 2 deputies, Joel and Caleb with a driver, and 3 men from town who liked a gathering. Torches flared in daylight, blue tongues whipped by wind, a theater for eyes hungry for certainty. Thunder answered from the south with a flat crack. The party spread across the yard as if claiming it by arrangement. Elias stepped to the gate and left it open, because traps look neater closed, and he wanted no one to think hospitality meant surrender. The sheriff lifted a hand. Rain ticked like sand on hats, shoulders and the barrel by the pump. Elias Hawthorne, he called, we are here for Abigail Vale. She must appear for a formal hearing today. New statements require immediate attention. Joel sat straight, lips set in sorrow's shape without its cost. Caleb wore pride like iron, and let his horse crowd the board. Abigail stood beside Elias, chin level, coat tied slim at the waist. Use my name as it is now, she said. Abigail Vale, widow by weather, not design. She did not step back, she did not step forward. She let the ground decide where she belonged, and the ground chose the threshold. Joel's voice cut through the gust. She engineered my brother's death to escape a marriage she resented. She manipulated debts. She convinced that man to hide the papers. We will have her account in full, under oath, before sundown. Hand her over. His words sounded polished by practice, like a hymn learned for reputation. The townsmen nodded as if the rhythm itself proved truth. Anger rose in Elias, then cooled into something harder. You brought a stage, he said. I brought proof. He walked to the south room, pressed his thumb against a knot in the baseboard, and lifted a narrow plank. A shallow cavity breathed dust. He drew out a wrapped packet, tied with brittle twine. The ranch seemed to lean in. He carried the bundle to the table, untied it, and laid out pages with slow hands, every line a fuse. The sheriff dismounted and came closer, boots leaving dark crescents on wet boards. What am I looking at? He asked, carefully. A deed, Elias replied, executed by Thomas Hargreave 6 months before the creek took him. It conveys a parcel beyond the bend, land that appears twice in ledgers. Once as collateral nobody told the bank. Once as newly acquired property with a valuation fit to make committeemen smile. Here are signatures from partners who never saw pasture. Here is a note that binds Joel and Caleb to an agreement with a company that owns only paper. Names repeat where they should not. Numbers skip where only fraud makes them jump. Caleb snorted. Forged. Elias met his eye. Explain the watermark, he said, lifting a page toward the light. Explain the notary who would cut off his own thumb before faking an entry. Explain why the stamp matches the register in town from a day when you two were in Pike County, urging donations for a school that still waits for boards. Wind shoved rain sideways. The torch nearest the porch sputtered, and flared again, smoke ripping across face. The deputies traded a glance that did not reach their mouths. The townsmen leaned forward because scandal is a tonic. Abigail spoke, voice steady. After the funeral my brothers inventoried everything worth lusting after. They left visible ledgers and removed what they wanted people to miss. They counted on grief to make me slow and on reputation to make officials forgive arithmetic, that behaved like theater. My husband made copies because he never trusted anyone to honor a deal if he could not leverage a second one. He stored the worst under floors where women sweep, and men forget to look. Joel drew breath through his teeth. Ridiculous. The sheriff lifted a palm. Enough. He turned to Elias. How long have these been here? Since I learned how to touch that board without waking my father's temper, Elias said. I was 12 when I noticed the seam, I never had cause to open it until a woman said my mother left maps instead of keys. He set a finger on the margin. Here, line 3. The creek parcel is collateral on Monday and conveyed free on Wednesday. That trick only works when a clerk likes your family more than the truth. Here, line 7. The same ground pledged again to cover a debt invented to move money from a public fund into private hands. Thunder rolled over them like a heavy cart. Rain struck hard and cold, beating on coats, dripping from hat brims. The sheriff studied the pages with a patience that made lanes through noise. He checked seals, weighed handwriting and followed numbers until a pattern rose like a snake from the grass, and held its head up for naming. I will need the register, he said, slowly. I will need the notary, the bank clerk, and a clerk from the recorder's office. I must know who handled these on the days in question. You may have whatever this house has, Elias said, and my word we will stand in town with you while you gather the rest. Caleb pushed his horse a step. We take her now? No, Elias answered, and the word reached the fence posts as if nailed to each in turn. You will not stage a victory with her body. If you want justice, follow the ink. The sheriff's eyes moved to Abigail. Do you run if I leave you here? I am done with running that ends inside other men's stories, she said. I will walk to town beside him, when you say and breathe where truth can hear me. A flash tightened the air. Thunder arrived so quickly that it hit in the same breath. One torch went out, another hurled spark. Wind tore a sheet of rain across the yard like a wall. The world narrowed to faces, breath and paper held fast under a palm. Joel swung down, spurs biting wet wood. Sheriff, you cannot let backwater superstition impede procedure. She belongs in custody. She belongs where evidence will not drown beneath performance. The sheriff said. He returned the top page to Elias. Guard these. If any go missing, I will hold you responsible. They will not go missing, Elias said. He slid the packet into the cavity and replaced the board, then turned the small screw he had set into a hidden slot years ago. It sat flush, unseen even by men determined to own everything that carries his name. The deputies shifted when Caleb reached for the porch rail. The sheriff shook his head once. Stand down, he ordered. We are not hauling anyone through rain for the sake of theater. We are reopening a file and following the money. Bring your witnesses tomorrow. Bring whatever copy you think prevents embarrassment. If you lie, you answer for it. Joel's mouth went white. Caleb swore into the wind. The driver stared at the fence because men who carry orders hate afternoons that unspool. A colt in the nearest stall stamped once as if to put a period on a loud sentence. Elias stood with his shoulder just inside the door, an anchor that gave without breaking. Abigail moved half a step nearer, not hiding, not defying, simply aligning her weight with his in a way he felt down his back like warmth after a long chill. He did not reach for her hand, though his fingers wanted to. The vow from last night lived without ceremony in how they occupied that threshold and refused to yield. The sheriff mounted. Hawthorne, he said. If a mob forms, you send a rider. I will, Elias replied. If a clerk tries to bury the register, you pull him by the collar. I will, the sheriff said, and meant it, because storms make certain men remember how oaths sound when spoken into wind instead of parlors. The column gathered itself. Torches leaned in the gusts like stubborn flowers. They clattered through the gate and drifted into gray. Thunder grumbled farther off, retreating over hills. Wind lost its teeth. The garden drank. The house seemed to straighten, relieved to carry a load that had needed lifting for years. Abigail exhaled, a careful release like a seam eased. Thank you, she said. Not finished, he answered. He looked at the south wall, then at the path slick with rain. We bring those pages to light in town. We stand there together. We do not blink. We do not, she said, and the words fit the room like a latch finding its seat. He set his hand on the frame, felt the grain like living bone, and knew that for now she was safe, and that tomorrow he would help bend a narrative away from spectacle toward truth. The sheriff had agreed to investigate the brother. A door had opened that could not be shut with wax, and Elias intended to hold it with both hands until the hinges forgot how to close. By noon the storm had spent itself over the hills, leaving cottonwoods rinsed and the creek running cold and clear. Elias saddled the mare and swung Abigail up behind him for the ride to town. The packet of papers bound under his coat like a second rib. They rode close, saying little, their quiet no longer wary but steady, like two hands on one rope. The courthouse crouched over the street, brick pretending to be a mountain. The sheriff waited on the steps with 2 deputies and a bankman eager to forgive numbers if reputation asked. Joel and Caleb stood by the hitch rail with faces arranged for sympathy. Elias laid the bundle before the recorder and named each page. He did not give speeches. He treated the ink like fence wire and the room like a corral that needed mending. Abigail stood beside him, voice spare when needed, precise as a seam. The notary checked his seal, nodded once, and set his thumb beside signatures that matched. The bankman read the watermark and stopped pretending. A deputy fetched the old register. The clerk compared entries and went paler with each line. Joel tried mockery, then outrage. Caleb tried volume. The sheriff, who had seen both for 20 winters, lifted a palm. "Does the ink say what they claim?" he asked. The notary said yes. The clerk admitted the duplicate collateral line. The bankman conceded the valuation trick. The prosecutor pulled from the back room, read twice, and said a third pass was not required. Abigail did not tremble or gloat. She folded her hands as if holding a bowl. When the deputies stepped toward Joel and Caleb, the room breathed. Shackles were not needed. The crack of pretense giving way made its own sound. The sheriff read the warrants. Fraud, conspiracy, misuse of public funds. Then he turned to Abigail and, with the plain certainty of weather, said, "Abigail Vale bears no criminal blame for Thomas Hargreaves' death. The creek took a man who would not respect its weight. The paper will answer the rest." Her shoulders eased the width of a finger. Elias felt breath return like a pony that had wandered but come back for grain. Outside, the wind moved the flags without malice. Word ran down the street, the way thaw runs under ice. Quiet, inevitable. The brothers were led to the jail without theater. Men who had come for spectacle found themselves witnessing consequences instead. The sheriff met them on the porch. He would question the clerk, audit the bank, and call the notary to swear again in open court. He thanked Elias for bringing what many had looked past and thanked Abigail for her steadiness. He did not ask for gratitude. He lifted his hat and went back inside to pin truth to paper while memory was sober. They rode home at a walk. The creek flashed between trunks, bright but no longer threatening. At the gate, Elias swung down and steadied Abigail with both hands. A wordless promise he now allowed to be seen. Her boot found earth. She did not step away at once. Their quiet said enough. The ranch felt larger, as if a fence had been moved without posts. The garden held its new geometry under burlap. The pump answered with an easy clank. He drew water while she warmed bread and set beans to simmer. The house exhaled damp and ash and something new. Relief given permission. They ate at the long table. The silence leaned toward laughter. He told her how his mother named onions to keep boys listening. She told him how a neighbor argued with chickens and lost. Stories stitched the room back together after months of terror. Have you ever felt a single decision change your days? What's a moment that changed your life forever? Share it with us. The thought crossed him as she tucked a strand behind her ear and left her hand near his on the board. Close enough that heat described the distance. Near dusk, 2 visitors came with the soft tread of people who understand thresholds. The school teacher, keeper of sums and cents, brought a note for the editor describing how careful arithmetic and patient voices had set a woman free of slander. The pastor, who knew the worth of plain vows, returned a shawl Abigail had left in a pew and said he could be ready any day. He did not press. He spoke like rain on dust. Useful, brief, kind. Abigail looked at Elias as if measuring the weather and the ground. "Tomorrow," she said. "At sundown." He nodded. The pastor smiled the smile a man saves for honest harvests, and promised a psalm and a blessing. The schoolteacher offered a pie and 2 witnesses. No one mentioned flowers. Cottonwoods had already arranged those. Night work. He checked the hinges, though they no longer complained. She mended a sleeve with thread that matched well enough to honor the tear without pretending it had not happened. Coffee steamed. A saucer held a crumb for the cat that visited when the moon cleared the branch. They spoke of fence lines, seed, and the cracked plate that still held because careful hands knew where to set it down. The next day opened clean and bright. The creek kept its quiet argument with stones. They worked as usual until the hour when they were asked to stop. Then the yard became a room without walls. The pastor stood near the steps with the schoolteacher and her husband, faces unadorned, ready. The sheriff, late and welcome, leaned his hat against his chest and looked like a man who had remembered why he wore a badge. Abigail wore the simple shawl. Elias wore the coat that had carried papers yesterday and would carry vows now. They stood where the house could hear them. The pastor's words were not poetry, they were better promises framed so the wind could bear witness. And the creek could carry them downstream to the bend where truth had changed course. Elias vowed to lift, mend, listen and stand in the doorway when storms tried the last. Abigail vowed to plant, steady, speak when needed and keep maps where tired minds could find them. They joined hands and in that brief contact the ranch felt itself agree. Afterward they cut a loaf, poured coffee and sat on the steps while light slid toward the ridge. The cat arrived on schedule and received its ceremonial crumb. Frogs tuned their evening chords. A hawk circled and drifted home, satisfied. They did not kiss for they smiled at each other in a way that made the witnesses look away like people who had wandered into prayer and recognized it, without being told. When the dark settled it sat friendly. The house creaked once. A bone easing. He banked the fire. She set his cup where morning would find it. Outside the cottonwoods whispered about rain that had come and gone without breaking them. Inside, two people who had lived as objects in other people's ledgers chose to live as authors in their own book. The land pleased, promised its part. Seasons honest about their costs. Harvests worth the ache. Weather that would test and then relent. And in the middle of it the two of them, steady at the gate, ready to meet whatever came with plain hands and a vow that did not need repeat. Morning light braided through cottonwoods, as the ranch woke to ordinary music. The pump handle tapping, the kettle murmuring, soft hoofscuffs in the corral. Abigail moved along the beds with a willow basket on her arm, checking beans that had forgiven the storm and tomatoes blushing beneath burlap. Elias tightened a gate hinge, then joined her with twine and stakes, listening to the creek's patient talk as if it were a neighbor with news. Work had a new shape now, two rhythms aligned, silence easy, purpose shared. The air smelled of wet cedar and warm soil. A lark trilled from the fence post, careless and free. The garden, once ragged, held green confidence. Dill feathered by the rails. Squash vines nosed over soft ridges. Lettuce rose crisp and bright. The row where she had knelt during the worst rain now stood like a kept promise. She trimmed spent leaves, straightened a leaning stake, and pressed her thumb into earth that remembered thunder yet chose generosity. He watched with private astonishment. A man who had treated survival as enough and discovered that tending could be another name for strength. She glanced up, caught him looking, and did not look away. The nod they traded felt like a vow renewed without words. They worked without hurry. He lifted the pail, paused to scratch the barn cat, and cut a wedge from last night's loaf. He broke it in two and offered the larger piece. She accepted, laughed softly, and tore it with steady hands. Beyond the cottonwoods, the sky rinsed to a clean blue. Thin clouds drifted like pale sails. Meadowlarks stitched bright notes through grass still jeweled with dew. A hawk circled slow and sure, pleased with thermals, untroubled by the ground's old argons. Fence wire hummed when wind passed, a small silver cord agreeing with the day. They spoke about a second bed along the shed, and a row of winter herbs, rosemary, and time to be nursed under a simple cold frame. They spoke about a calf that had learned to push the gate and how patience, not fear, could unteach the habit. They spoke about the hearing to finish in town, not with dread but with plain steadiness, certain that ink would hold. He said they would ride in early, stand where everyone could see their faces, and answer only what belonged to them. She said she would carry the shawl the pastor returned, and keep her voice level. They did not rehearse courage, they practiced it by planting. At noon they ate in the porch shade, bread, beans, early leaves, coffee poured black and clean. The windmill turned and told its slow truth, a patched plate held up like it always had under careful hands. The day widened, generous and sure. A hen made a foolish dash at a beetle and missed. Abigail laughed, one quick bright sound that made him want to mend every loose hinge left in the world. He had vowed to stand indoors when storms came. Now he learned a second vow, to make good weather when clouds lifted, to let rest be the work's companion rather than its reward. He brought a tin from the cupboard and opened a parcel of seeds saved from his mother's jars, labeled in tidy script, marigold, sage, sweet peas. Abigail turned the slips and read the notes aloud. Plant for color, for scent, for company. She held the sweet peas to the light and smiled with her whole face. Together they measured a fresh line near the porch, pressed shallow furrows with careful fingers, and let the seeds fall like small bright promises. Soil slid back with a tender push. He tamped the edge with his palm. She watered with a slow, even sweep. The ground drank and darkened, and seemed to breathe. The afternoon cooled. Shadows grew kind. He patched the little roof over the woodpile while she rinsed jars and lined them on the sill, glass catching the sun. When he climbed down, he found her at the table with a small book. She did not hide the page. She listed plantings, rain notes, dates, a line about the hawk that kept them company, and one about a loaf that broke clean without a crumble. He loved that record, without needing the word, and laid the pencil where her hand would find it in the morning. She set the book beside the lamp as if setting a compass on a map. Near evening, the schoolteacher's pie tin returned, empty and grateful. The sheriff rode past and touched his brim, satisfied with the weather and with justice still running. Neighbors who had once traded rumors brought a sack of seed and 2 lengths of good wire. No speeches, no apologies, only acts that taught a better language. Elias felt lighter than he had since boyhood, not because hardship had vanished, but because it had met its match. The future looks spacious, not soft, simply honest about its cost and its grace. They washed supper dishes in the last goal. The garden breathed, giving back pepper and mint to the air. Cottonwoods practiced their soft talk, leaves flicking like coins in a gentle wind. He reached across the table and took her hand. She met his look and held it. They had not been saved by luck. They had built safety, plank by plank, hour by hour, choosing truth when noise offered easier company. That recognition fitted them like a coat sewn to size. Loved Elias and Abigail's story? Click the video on your screen for another epic frontier tale. Subscribe and drop a super chat to keep these stories alive. Your support means everything. Night drifted in like velvet. Stars loosened themselves from the blue. Crickets tuned the edges of the yard. An owl rehearsed a lesson over the creek. He banked the fire and left a modest flame to greet dawn. She set 2 cups where morning could find them, and folded the cloth with the neatness of someone who trusts tomorrow. The cat leapt to the sill and sat guard as if appointed by some small county office. They stepped outside, boots on cool boards, and breathed the sweetness that follows honest rain. Land stretched dark and sure. The creek kept its song. The breeze went easily over the roof and rail, promising nothing but the truth of. He brought a small sack of kernels, and a folded paper of peas. She took the peas and cupped them like fragile coins. He showed the trick his mother taught him. Press the pad of the finger, not the nail, and speak the name of what you plant without apology. She added hers. Leave room for roots to argue. Lay mulch like a blessing, and mark the row so the next soul who bends here knows someone cared. Bats stitched the dusk. Water flashed silver under starlight where the creek turned. Their shoulders touched and stayed so, an easy leaning that told the body what the mind already knew. When they covered the last furrow, they sat back on their heels. The porch lamp threw a kind circle, haloing their tools in common light. Coyotes called once and quiet. He thought of the boy who had feared the seam in the south wall and the man who had opened it to free a woman from a script. She thought of the girl shipped like cargo and the woman who walked back out, head high, ledger closed. Storms would keep visiting this country. They always did. But storms were no longer authors here. They were weather, and weather, properly met, becomes instruction rather than law. They rose, brushed soil from their palms, and faced a house that had learned new habits. He set the latch. She hung the shawl. Tomorrow would bring chores, letters, a ride to town, maybe a new calf, certainly a list, and the old pleasure of crossing items one by one. The frontier, rinsed and bright, reached toward the ridge with humility that felt like hope. He opened the sack once more. She held out her hand. They planted the last seeds side by side, the smallest saved for the edge nearest the steps, where feet would pass and remember. The earth accepted them with quiet grace, sealing each tiny future with a breath. Their hands lingered over the row a moment longer, palms warm, fingers steady, and then as evening settled, they stood together and watched the ground that would carry their name grow dark and faithful under a sky that finally truly cleared.